A cleaning lady giving her opinion? That's the end of the world. Elena Morales heard that without even looking up. She was used to it. Humiliation had become an old companion, and silence, her shield. Black, an immigrant, and carrying a past few could imagine, she scrubbed the floors while the world walked over her dreams. But what no one knew was that behind that simple uniform hid a secret, a gift powerful enough to make even a millionaire swallow his pride. And when the right moment came, the woman everyone ignored taught them that the greatest lessons in life often come from those the world refuses to see. Subscribe to Fire Story and discover what Elena did when they laughed at her. In the cold heart of Boston, the day began like any other. But for Elena Morales, each morning carried the same invisible weight of routine. She arrived before everyone else, swept the spotless floors of rooms that would never belong to her, and smiled to hide her exhaustion. The blue uniform was her silent armor, and the bucket in her hands, a daily reminder of everything she had left behind. Between hurried footsteps and eyes that never really saw her, she had learned to be invisible, and in a way that protected her. No one imagined that beneath that simple apron lay a brilliant past, a secret locked away for years. But that morning, something different was in the air. A murmur, an urgency, a tension that broke the monotony of her days. And it was in that instant that fate decided to test her once again. As she wiped the mirrored floor of the conference room, Elena noticed the growing commotion. Executives in suits rushed in and out, phones rang non-stop, and unfamiliar languages echoed through the air. "They need a translator," whispered one of the assistants. Elena lifted her gaze. That, she knew well. For a second, something sparked inside her. That quiet certainty of someone who knows she can help but hesitates to speak. After all, how many times had humiliation come disguised as a joke? How many times had prejudice spoken louder than reason? Still, something in her chest told her this time was different. That maybe, just maybe, it was time to break the silence that had followed her for years. The voices grew louder, mixed with the frustration of people who didn't know what to do. Standing by the door, Elena took a deep breath. "I can translate, for 1,000 euros, she said, not realizing she had just lit the fuse of an earthquake. The silence that followed was sharp as glass. Every head turned toward her, some in surprise, others with mockery. Victoria Hale, the company's CEO, whose smile was as sharp as her heels, turned slowly and said with icy irony, 1,000 euros? So besides cleaning, you dream too." The laughter was instant. The sound cut through the room like a blade, slicing the little dignity her uniform still protected. Elena didn't answer. She just lowered her eyes and gripped the rag tighter, trying to mask the pain burning inside. The scene lasted only a few seconds, but to Elena, it felt like an eternity. The collective laughter had a bitter taste, and every disdainful glance weighed heavier than the bucket she carried. She had been through this before, that kind of humiliation that doesn't fade, that revisits you in dreams, that makes your soul ache in silence. But this time, something inside her refused to accept it. The secret she carried, her trained mind, her fluency in languages, her hidden intelligence, burned like fire beneath her skin. And although she knew speaking up could cost her job, life had taught her one thing. Sometimes, silence is the worst form of surrender. That's when she realized there was no turning back. Victoria was still smiling, shaking her head as if she'd just heard something absurd. "Unbelievable," she muttered, sparking another wave of laughter. One of the younger executives tried to ease the tension, but the arrogance in the air was unshakable. Elena stepped back, swallowing the knot in her throat. Inside, she remembered the days when she taught at the university, when her words inspired students instead of sweeping dust. Now, fate seemed to mock her, whispering, "Look where life has brought you." Yet no one noticed that the woman they dismissed as small carried a greatness that no millionaire could measure. As the laughter faded, Elena picked up her rag and moved to a corner, pretending to focus on her work. But her mind was far away. She thought of her husband, of the promise she'd made before leaving him in the hospital in Spain. "I'll start over for us." Every drop of sweat on that cold floor was a piece of that promise being kept. She knew she couldn't react with anger, Anger would destroy what little faith she had left. So she took a deep breath, lifted her chin, and kept her pride intact. Unbeknownst to her, every move was being watched and judged. Some laughed. Others, deep down, admired the calm strength of a woman who didn't need to shout to have worth. Outside, the wind rattled the tall windows, the glass vibrating like a warning of what was about to unfold. The official translator still hadn't arrived, and the clock was mercilessly ticking. The CEO glanced nervously at the digital timer on the wall while Victoria pretended composure under her mask of confidence. Elena, silent as ever, could feel it. Something was coming. A chance. A break. Maybe even a test. And when life decides to test someone, it doesn't warn. It simply throws the challenge and waits to see who remains standing. The lesson was about to begin, though no one was ready to learn it. Suddenly, a voice shouted, "Someone needs to do something, or we're going to lose this deal." The tone was desperate. Elena looked up once more. The impulse came instantly, almost involuntarily. The woman scrubbing the floor could understand every word the foreign investors were saying on the video call, and what they were saying wasn't good. "They're getting impatient," she thought. "And they don't even know I could fix this." But who would believe her? In a world where a last name meant more than a heartbeat, who would listen to a cleaning lady? Still, deep down, she knew. Time always reveals the true worth of a person. The clock hit 10 minutes past the meeting's start. The tension was thick enough to cut. Someone suggested canceling, another shouted for a plan B. Victoria paced back and forth, her heels striking the floor like hammers, while the CEO rubbed his chin in silence. That's when Elena felt courage rise inside her like a wave. "What if it's now?" she thought. "What if this is my chance to prove that silence also speaks?" Her heart pounded. Her hands trembled. But her eyes, they were steady. Because inside her, humiliation had turned into fuel. And when the soul is ready, even fear learns to obey. Without asking permission, Elena took a step forward. The sound of her shoes echoed on the polished floor, catching everyone's attention. The room froze. The woman they ignored now stood before the main table, holding her rag like an invisible trophy. "Mrs. Hale," she said firmly, "may I try again?" A new silence filled the room, heavier, deeper this time. Eyes met. The air seemed to freeze. And there, before an audience unaware of what they were about to witness, Elena Morales prepared to prove that a person's worth isn't found in what they wear, but in what they carry within. The conference room was boiling. The clock on the wall mocked them, marking every second as if counting down to disaster. The hired translator wasn't answering his phone, and the video feed showed the European investors' growing impatience. The air conditioner roared, but no one noticed. The atmosphere was pure chaos. Victoria Hale paced in circles, her heels clacking like a metronome of panic. "This is unacceptable," she shouted. "They're about to hang up. We're losing the deal." No one replied. The CEO stared blankly at the papers on the table, as if searching for a miracle. And there, leaning quietly against the wall, Elena watched. Calm, observant, like someone watching a storm take shape. The same people who had laughed at her minutes earlier were now trapped in their own arrogance. Panic spread through the room. One of the executives tried to improvise a few words in French but stumbled badly. The investor on the screen arched an eyebrow, confused. Elena knew exactly what had just been said, an offensive phrase, though not intended that way. He just called them lazy, she thought, feeling her stomach drop. That mistake would cost them dearly. She looked around, waiting for someone to notice. No one did. The silence that followed felt almost physical. The humiliation had switched sides now. The powerful ones were sweating, lost, and desperate. And in that moment, she understood something. Life always finds a way to teach a lesson, even if it has to use someone else's pain to do it. Victoria slammed her hand on the table. "Someone, for God's sake, say something," she cried, her voice a mix of fury and despair. The CEO, trying to keep his composure, took a deep breath and said, "Let's wait 5 more minutes." But the investors didn't seem patient. One of them took off his headset and muttered something in German. Elena understood it perfectly. Incompetent. The word cut through the air like an arrow. Her heart started to race. She wanted to speak, to fix it, to prove she could save the situation, but the sting of humiliation still burned inside her. What if they laugh again? She thought. What if I lose my job? Yet another voice within her, older, stronger, whispered, what if this is the moment everything changes? Her hands trembled, and the rag slipped slightly from her fingers. She caught it again, gripping it tightly, like she was holding onto her own destiny. Victoria was pacing, shouting into her phone, no, we don't have a replacement. Yes, I know. They're furious. The sound of her heels echoed like a ticking clock counting down to collapse. A glass fell from the table and shattered on the floor. The tension exploded. One executive yelled, "This is a disaster." Elena took a deep breath. The sound of water dripping from the wet rag seemed louder than all the voices. It was as if the whole world had gone quiet just to hear her think. The secret inside her, the woman who once taught languages to diplomats, pulsed, begging to be released. The CEO wiped sweat from his forehead and muttered, "They're about to leave the call, Victoria." She bit her lip and replied with a trembling voice, "If they do, it'll be my fault." For a moment, the arrogant businesswoman looked human. The cold gleam in her eyes gave way to genuine fear. Elena felt something unexpected. Pity. Yes, pity. Because sometimes life brings down pride just to teach empathy. And that, she knew well. Humiliation teaches more than success, she thought. Maybe now she'll understand. Without realizing it, Elena's heart began to shift too, not out of revenge, but out of purpose. 2 minutes, someone called out. The voice sounded like a sentence being delivered. Elena watched Victoria lean on the table, her face pale, her eyes unfocused. The investors were arguing among themselves. One of them stood up and walked out of frame. "They're leaving," shouted the youngest executive. And that's when Elena heard it. Not with her ears, but with her spirit. That silent calling life makes when it's about to turn the page. Fear gave way to courage, and shame was replaced by a strength she didn't even know she still had. Because when the soul realizes its time has come, nothing can stop it. The room was chaos. Phones ringing, voices overlapping, eyes darting in panic. Elena stepped forward, hesitant, but determined. No one noticed at first. Just the cleaner moving, they thought. But something was different in the way she walked. The steady gaze, the upright posture, the calm expression. "Can I help?" she said softly, almost in a whisper. No one answered. So she said it again, louder this time. "Mrs. Hale, I can help." Victoria turned slowly, incredulous. "What?" she asked, frowning. "I said, I can help." The silence that followed was pure shock. People exchanged looks as if the floor had just vanished beneath them. One of the executives whispered, "Is she really going to try again?" Victoria folded her arms. "Do you really think you can handle this?" she asked, her tone dripping with sarcasm. Elena lifted her chin. "I can try," she replied firmly. "The worst that can happen is that you lose what you're already losing." For a moment, no one knew what to say. The CEO, exhausted, simply nodded. "Do what you can." And just like that, without applause, without fanfare, the most underestimated woman in that company was given permission to change everything. Elena took a deep breath. The screens still showed the impatient faces of the investors. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her chest. Her hands were damp, but her gaze was steady, sure. She knew that if she failed, it would be over, but if she succeeded, it might be a new beginning. "All right," she whispered to herself, adjusting the microphone. Life, she thought, had a strange sense of irony. The ones silenced by humiliation are often the very ones carrying the gift of the solution. And in that moment, Elena Morales was about to prove it. "Good afternoon, gentlemen," she said, in flawless French. The impact was instant. One of the investors widened his eyes. Another leaned forward, astonished. Victoria froze. The sound of Elena's voice was different now, steady, fluid, full of authority. For a moment, no one breathed. And as she began translating each sentence with surgical precision, the impossible started to feel real. The room that minutes ago buzzed with chaos now sank into a reverent silence. It was the sound of a turning point about to unfold. And then, in that surreal moment, Victoria whispered to the colleague beside her, "This can't be happening." But it was. And it was only the beginning. The first phrase came out soft but perfect. "Good afternoon, gentlemen," Elena repeated, with a flawless accent that made the air in the room vibrate. For a second, time stood still. The investors on the screen leaned closer, amazed. Her French wasn't just correct. It was elegant, musical, the kind spoken by someone who had lived among books and lecture halls. Victoria Hale's eyes widened, unable to hide her astonishment. The same group that had laughed at her minutes earlier now sat frozen in disbelief. Her voice flowed through the room like music, dissolving chaos and commanding respect. The translator who never arrived was forgotten in seconds. The humiliation from before was already transforming into awe. And without realizing it, Elena Morales was about to change not only the meeting, but the fate of everyone in that room. The CEO straightened in his chair, trying to hide his shock. "My God, she's translating everything," he whispered to Victoria, who remained frozen, caught between disbelief and admiration. Elena kept her tone even, translating every technical term, every subtle nuance, with a confidence no one would have ever expected from a cleaning lady. "Who is she?" one of the executives muttered under his breath. "A woman with a secret," another replied, barely aware he'd spoken aloud. At the front of the room, Elena seemed almost in a trance, as if language itself was her second breath. The rhythm of the room shifted, arrogant glances turned to focused attention, and the heavy silence became reverence. With every phrase, the tension melted away. Hostility gave way to curiosity. The investors, now smiling, regained their confidence, gesturing and praising the mysterious interpreter. Elena understood everything, and responded with the same mastery. French turned to English, English to Italian, Italian to Spanish, as if she had been born in each of those places. The woman who had been laughed at minutes earlier now held the room in the palm of her hand. "This isn't possible," murmured Victoria, her voice shaking. But it was. The impossible was happening, right before their eyes. The lesson was being written in real time, and its ink was courage. The minutes passed like seconds. The CEO couldn't take his eyes off Elena. With each translation, she was restoring not only the company's confidence but also the dignity they had tried to strip from her. The sound of her voice was the opposite of humiliation. It was rebirth. One of the investors asked in German if they could send the revised contract that same day. Elena translated it exactly, without stumbling, and added a precise note, correcting a calculation no one had caught. "Did she just fix the contract?" the youngest executive murmured. The CEO slowly nodded, like a man witnessing something sacred. "She saved the meeting," he said. Victoria, who had been leaning on the table, finally sat down. Her face was pale. Her high heels felt like they weighed a ton. Inside, something was collapsing. The arrogance, the pride, the habit of measuring people by their clothes or their title, it all seemed small now. Watching Elena, she saw something money could never buy: composure. There was greatness in every gesture of the woman she had crushed to dust just hours earlier. And as the meeting went on, Victoria felt a sharp pang in her chest, a mix of shame and admiration. For the first time in a long time, she was learning a real lesson, and ironically, the teacher was the cleaner she had humiliated. "Please go on," the CEO asked, his voice calm, almost solemn. Elena nodded and continued, now in Italian. The ease with which she moved between languages left everyone spellbound. The words danced from one tongue to another, as if they answered to her. One of the investors smiled and said in Spanish, "You are extraordinary." Elena translated without hesitation, but something inside her trembled, an emotion that threatened to crack her professional mask. It was as if all the pain of those silent years had finally found a voice. For a moment, she wanted to cry. But not yet. This was only the start of the turnaround. In the corner, a few employees began filming discreetly on their phones, trying to capture the moment. The woman who mopped the floors was now steering an international negotiation. The contrast was so stark it felt cinematic. Her voice filled the room, steady, clear as crystal. The CEO folded his arms and smiled, proud. "Incredible," he murmured. "Absolutely incredible." Victoria kept her eyes fixed on Elena, as if trying to understand who she really was. And maybe that was the point. None of them truly knew who Elena Morales was. The secret was being revealed, not with shouting, but with competence and calm. The investors started applauding on screen. Elena thanked them with a slight nod, her eyes shining. The room, still in shock, felt too small for what had just happened. The woman who minutes earlier embodied humiliation now symbolized salvation. It was like watching justice be born in a place it rarely enters. And in that moment, without saying a single grand word, she showed the world that no one is defined by their job title, but by the strength they carry in their soul. A reverent silence took over the room. Even the hum of the air conditioner seemed to stop and listen. "Who taught you all this?" the CEO asked, genuinely curious. Elena took a deep breath, holding back her emotion. "Life," she said. "It's the toughest teacher there is, and the only one that doesn't accept quitting." Her words rang like poetry. Victoria lowered her gaze. The cruel laugh that once amused her now made her ashamed. Without knowing it, Elena was healing something far bigger than her own hurt. She was healing the arrogance of those who think power comes from titles. And maybe that was the greatest lesson of all. The meeting ended with applause. The investors, delighted, promised to finalize the contract and visit the company in person. Elena thanked them in each language, with the grace of someone born to shine but forced to hide. When the screens went dark, the silence returned, only now it was a different kind of silence. Not indifference, but admiration. The same group that had dismissed her now looked at her with respect. Victoria brushed away a quiet tear before whispering, "She saved us." And the CEO, still in disbelief, answered softly, "No, Victoria, she gave us a new chance to be human." Elena took a long breath, feeling the weight lift from her shoulders. There were no cheers, no confetti, just the sense of a mission accomplished. The secret she had guarded for years had finally come to light. But she knew this wasn't the end, only the first step toward something bigger. Fate, after all, always leaves the door cracked open for those who learn from pain. Outside, the sunset began to tint the glass walls, as if the sky were quietly saying, "There's more to come." The room was empty. Only papers lay scattered on the table, and the echo of distant applause lingered. Elena stood there, motionless, trying to grasp what had just happened. The glow of the darkened screens reflected on her face, mixed with the fatigue and lightness of someone who had carried more than she should. The CEO approached slowly, his steps measured and respectful. Victoria, still seated, kept her eyes down, her hands trembling in her lap. The silence that once held contempt now held reverence, the kind of silence born when truth finally speaks, when humiliation loses its power and remorse finds its voice. "Ms. Morales," the CEO began, his voice low, almost a whisper, "where did you learn all this?" Elena gave a small smile, no arrogance, just the calm of someone who knows the weight of her own scars. "I was a linguistics professor in Spain," she said. "I spent 10 years teaching languages and literature. But my husband got sick. Treatment was expensive, and my salary wasn't enough." She paused, swallowing the memory. "So I came to the United States. I thought starting over would be easy. But the world is cruel to those who carry an accent and dark skin." The words hung in the air, heavy, true. Victoria looked up, her eyes wet. No one breathed. Every word out of Elena's mouth was both a confession and a lesson. "Why didn't you tell us sooner?" the CEO asked, genuinely moved. Because I learned that sometimes silence is the only way to survive, she replied. Here, a woman like me isn't heard until she does the impossible. Her tone wasn't bitter, it was wise. Victoria lowered her head, feeling the weight of her own guilt. The laughter that had echoed earlier now burned in her memory. I laughed at you, she said, her voice shaking. And I'm ashamed of it. Elena looked at her with kindness. It wasn't the first time someone laughed. But maybe it's the first time someone regretted it. The CEO stepped closer. You do realize you saved the company today, he said. Elena smiled humbly. No, sir. I just did what I could. The rest was God. That simple line carried more power than any speech. Victoria dabbed at her tears, trying to rebuild what was left of her composure. When I first saw you, I thought you were just another worker, she admitted. But now I see how blind I was. Elena drew a steady breath. It's not just you, Ms. Hale. A lot of people don't see another person's value until they need them. The room was full of small sounds, the buzz of the lights, the creak of chairs, the wind brushing the windows. Everything seemed to slow down. Victoria stood and walked over to Elena. I laughed at you, she repeated, but you taught me what greatness is. Her voice broke, and Elena's face softened. Greatness isn't in the one who humiliates, she said, but in the one who endures without returning harm. For a moment, the two women stood face to face, one asking forgiveness, the other offering compassion. It was a meeting of wounded souls, joined by a lesson the world often tries to teach by force. The CEO drew a deep breath. You know, Elena, I've worked with people at every level for 20 years, but today I learned more than in any MBA. Elena let out a small laugh, part relief, part disbelief. Life is the best course there is, sir. And it charges a high tuition. His eyes softened. You deserve a lot more than that uniform. She lowered her gaze, almost embarrassed. I don't want pity, just respect. He nodded. And you'll have it. From now on, everyone will. It was a promise that sounded sincere, born from real recognition, not guilt. Victoria, her eyes still filled with tears, asked softly, Do you forgive me? Elena thought for a moment before replying, Forgiveness isn't a gift I give, it's a freedom I allow myself. The words fell like a blessing. Victoria broke down, crying openly, her face stripped of makeup and pride. The woman who once seemed untouchable and arrogant now looked simply human, someone who finally understood that no amount of status could buy character. Elena hugged her briefly, sincerely, and in that embrace, a silent war came to an end. Humiliation had turned into a lesson. Do you plan to stay here? The CEO asked, cleaning his glasses. Elena sighed. I'm not sure. Maybe life still has plans for me. But wherever I go, I want to keep translating, not just languages, but feelings. Victoria smiled through her tears. Translating feelings, that's exactly what the world needs. Their laughter mingled, soft, freeing. For the first time, the conference room, once a stage for power and vanity, felt human, a place where money bowed before dignity. The afternoon light began to fade. The sun streamed through the windows, painting golden reflections on the same floor Elena had cleaned so many times. The same floor that once reflected humiliation now shone with respect. The CEO gathered the papers and said firmly, Elena, we need to talk about your future here. Victoria nodded. She needs to be where her voice can be heard. Elena, not yet knowing what awaited her, simply smiled. The future has a habit of surprising those who believe. And with that phrase, full of faith and lightness, destiny began to move again. Outside, the sun was setting over Boston, coloring the city in orange and gold. The window's reflection showed three different people, a remorseful businesswoman, a changed man, and a woman who never stopped believing. Humiliation had become a bridge, her secret had turned into strength, and the lesson was written in silence. The world, unknowingly, had just witnessed the first of many turnarounds to come. 2 days later, the atmosphere at the company was completely different. The story of Elena had spread like wildfire, the cleaning lady who spoke 5 languages and saved €1 million deal. Journalists called, and executives from other branches wanted to meet her. What had once been silence was now admiration. Yet Elena remained the same, sweeping the same hallway, head held high, her smile modest. The blue uniform still covered her body, but now it looked like a mantle of victory. Humiliation had been washed away by time, and by respect. Still, she had no idea what was about to happen next. That morning, a mysterious email summoned everyone to a general meeting. The main hall was packed, employees, directors, journalists, all waiting in anticipation. The CEO took the small stage, with Victoria Hale beside him, visibly moved. The chatter stopped. The microphone echoed through the room. Today, we've witnessed something far greater than business. We've witnessed a lesson. The audience fell silent. At the back of the room, Elena stood with her cleaning bucket in hand, unsure why she'd been called. Her heart raced. "Please, bring her here," said the CEO. Victoria stepped down from the stage, walked toward her, and extended her hand. "Elena, it's you." The applause began softly, then grew, filling the room. Elena walked slowly forward, eyes glistening, hands trembling. Every step was a victory over years of silence. Victoria guided her to the center of the stage. "This woman," she said, her voice breaking, "taught me something no university ever could, that a person's true worth lies in their character, not their title." The audience clapped again. Elena could barely speak. The CEO smiled. "As of today, Elena Morales is our new coordinator of international relations." The crowd erupted. Applause thundered through the building, as if justice itself had finally found a voice. Tears streamed down Elena's face before she could stop them. Victoria embraced her sincerely. "You deserve the world, Elena." She replied through tears, "I just want to keep being useful, and remind people that no one is invisible." Cameras flashed. The golden light from the windows bathed the scene in warmth and triumph. Every ray of light seemed to whisper the same truth. Dignity, when it's real, shines even in the shadows. Amid the applause, Elena spotted the night janitor, a simple man, watching from a distance. She smiled at him, and in that small gesture, made it clear that her victory belonged to all the forgotten ones. Because those who have scrubbed floors know the weight of seeing the world shine from below. The CEO, still emotional, said, "Sometimes God hides treasures in the most unlikely places. And when they're revealed, they remind us that pride is blind." The audience nodded in silence, tears in their eyes. Victoria wiped her face and added, "I was a millionaire surrounded by power, but it was this woman, the one the world deemed small, who taught me what greatness truly is." Elena looked at her tenderly. "Money can buy you the top, but only respect keeps you there." The audience cheered. It was as if each word cut through the air like arrows of light. Humiliation had been transformed into forgiveness, her secret into strength, and the lesson into legacy. At the end of the speech, the CEO handed Elena a new ID badge, shining, engraved with her name and new title. She held it in her hands, and for a moment, the world around her disappeared. She thought of her husband, the small apartment, the hidden tears, the whispered prayers. "You made it, Elena," she murmured to herself. Life, which had once brought her to her knees, now let her stand tall. And that applause, that sound rising from the hearts of people, was the recognition that had always existed, though the world had taken too long to see it. Outside, the sunset bathed Boston in orange and gold. The glass facade reflected a new Elena, not the cleaning lady, not just the teacher, but a complete woman, reborn. She walked to the window, gazing at the city. Victoria approached and whispered, "You know what's most beautiful about all this? You didn't have to change to win. You just had to keep being yourself." Elena smiled. Because what's true, time always reveals. The applause swelled again, louder this time. The audience rose to their feet, some crying, others smiling. The sound of clapping and voices filled the hall like a chorus of justice. It was the kind of moment that stays with you, the kind of story that makes the heart believe again. Elena looked upward, closed her eyes, and whispered a prayer of gratitude. The humiliation of yesterday had become the bridge to today's miracle. And in that instant, she understood. Every tear had a purpose, every pain a reason. If this story touched your heart, like this video, share it with someone who needs this reminder, and subscribe to Fire Story. Because stories like this remind the world that justice may take time, but it always arrives.